1. Sanctuary. Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, having been called to the audition of a lifetime, hurried through the filigree of Mecca's palm leaf huts and humble mud brick homes to the opulent coral stone mansion of Djdjejj bint Khuwailid. The small town's wealthiest merchant, and its most eligible widow, was deciding whether to appoint the 25-year-old to lead her next trading mission up to Damascus. If he received the commission, it would change his life, but many traders with more experience than he were likely in the running. 1. Muhammad had been born in the West Arabian sanctuary city of Mecca, a zone of peace among feuding tribes. Muhammad's clan, the Hashim, served as caretakers and ministers of the Kaaba, a cube-shaped shrine to God the Most High, where they maintained concord throughout the year. The tribe of which it formed a part, the Quraysh, depended for their livelihood on the shrine to God and the penumbra of peace it cast over the Red Sea coastal region of the Tihama, in which Mecca was nestled. They traveled for commerce and held their own trade fairs that attracted merchants from all over the region. This rough neighborhood was bounded by the Roman Empire to the north and the Sasanian Empire 224 to 651 CE of Iran to the south and east. 2. Muhammad, an orphan, likely viewed peace and conflict through the lens of his disadvantaged start in life. Some traditions say that when Muhammad's mother was pregnant with him, his father, Abdullah, died of fever at Yathrib, later known as Medina, on returning from a trade journey to Gaza. That year of the elephant, probably around 567, Mecca repulsed an invasion from Yemen. 3. When Muhammad was 6, his widowed mother, Amina, took him to visit some of his relatives who lived in Yathrib. She died on the way back, leaving the little boy Muhammad bereft of both parents. Muhammad's grandfather Shaiba, Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hashim, took the boy into his own household. Reputedly tall, imposing in appearance, quick-witted, and a shrewd politician, Abd al-Muttalib had an arresting grey streak through his jet-black head of hair. The paramount chief of the Hashim clan, he served as custodian of the sacred well of Zamzam, which he had rediscovered. He provided its copious water to pilgrims who came to Mecca to worship at the city's shrine to God the Most High. Without providing a major water source, Abd al-Muttalib could not have hoped to attract a significant pilgrimage trade. Pilgrims brought in money and offerings of much-needed food from more fertile and prosperous areas, welcome gifts, given that hardscrabble Mecca had limited agricultural lands. Arabia has been likened to a burlap toque with golden hems, coarse within, as at Mecca, but flourishing along the coasts. The Banu Hashim lacked the wealth and power of some other clans in the city, though as caretakers of the holy shrine they enjoyed high social status. Muhammad the orphan, as the least prestigious member of his clan, suffered some humiliations. He had to work as a shepherd for his grandfather. His uncles and cousins bullied him because he had no father to protect him, and he lacked a long-lived hero of the previous generation whose exploits he could celebrate in poetry. Abd al-Muttalib used to spread a runner outside the Kaaba in Mecca where he would hold meetings. His many sons would gather and sit on it waiting for him. Little Muhammad once came and plopped down, also eager for his grandfather to arrive. He was dismayed to find that his jealous uncles tried to wave him off, yelling, "Get off your father's carpet." On one occasion Abd al-Muttalib arrived to witness this scene and told them to cease. 4. Later on, the Quran would refer, the city 90, 14-16, to the steep path of high ethics as requiring, feeding, during a famine, an orphan related to you, or a grubby vagrant. After 2 years, Abd al-Muttalib also died, and Muhammad went to the household of his paternal uncle Abu Talib, who became the paramount chief of the Hashim clan. Now, at age 25, Muhammad had an opportunity to escape his relative poverty. When the modest camel trains assembled outside Mecca to go to Syria, Qadia's rivaled all the others combined, that is, she may have possessed half of the town's long-distance merchant capital. 5. Muhammad's uncle Abu Talib had recommended him when she asked for someone honest and reliable. Khadija, somewhat Muhammad's elder, would have met him in her receiving room with her circle of advisors. Making her decision, she underlined the responsibility she was vouchsafing to him. "I've entrusted you with twice as many goods as any of your predecessors among your people." She sent along her manservant Maysara, likely as much to keep an eye on her capital as to serve Muhammad. The young man had just gained a magnificent opportunity, but he had incurred daunting risks as well. Let us try to imagine what his hazardous journey through the world of the late 6th century was like. The caravan may have set out from the small Arabian holy city in August 592. Citizens gathered beneath the lambent late afternoon sun to see the traders off, having invested in the mission, ringing bells and beating tambourines. Muhammad and the other traders wore the white robes of merchant priests of peace. They thereby signaled to any hostile tribesmen that they had no warlike intentions and traveled between sanctuaries under the protection of the Creator God. Members of the Hashim clan had a special advantage in this regard since they served as caretakers of the Kaaba, and even coarse rural tribesmen respected their vocation. Bedouin children ran up to them, giggling and hawking fruit and water. Muhammad and his men would have passed through occasional adobe villages, roofs thatched with palm leaves, as they traversed the Auburn steppe, interrupted by teal bushes and strewn with colorful loose chert. 6. Such travelers rode through the night beneath a spangled sky. At dawn the sun slowly flared behind low basalt hills, tinting the twisted crags with rose and violet, then embossing them in brass. They halted when the heat of the day grew too oppressive, catching some sleep and waiting for nightfall. After several days of riding, the party would have reached the date palm oasis of Yathrib. They're happy to see some limpid pools and fruit-laden date and jujube trees after days of eating dust. They would have stocked up on water, dates, and other refreshments for the precarious arid trek north. A vassal of Sasanian Iran from the local pagan Khazraj tribe then ruled this city, but the Meccans had preserved their own neutrality between Iran and the Roman Empire. 7. Muhammad would have visited with his relatives in Medina. His great-grandmother Salma was a Khazraji woman of the Najjar clan. The Banu Najjar, despite being such distant cousins, would have valued the connection to Muhammad's family, custodians of the sacred Kaaba. Medinans went on pilgrimage to the shrine of God in Mecca, though they also visited the temple they had erected to the goddess of fate, Manat. 8. Then Muhammad and his convoy would have set off again north in the late afternoon. When voyagers passed over patches of white sand, the granules glinted in the relentless sun like miniature diamonds. Thirst and discomfort beset the travelers, as distant mirages of sweet water spitefully vanished on the closer approach. Occasionally, they might have startled ranging herds of spear-horned oryx, which scattered with dazzling speed. Keening desert gales assailed them like the breath of a dragon, and when a sandstorm came up, it pricked the skin as though with innumerable tiny needles. The Meccans would have been inordinately grateful for the occasional majestic cumulus cloud that offered them some respite from the irate summer sun. Along the way, the merchants would have bought simple supplies from rural Bedouins. We can gain an idea of this journey from the Piacenza pilgrim, a Roman who traveled in the Near East in the 570s during Muhammad's childhood. He wrote of the Arabs, or Saracens. Families of the Saracens and their wives came from the desert, and, sitting by the wayside with lamentations, laying down the bundles, begged for bread from those who passed by, and their husbands came, bringing skins of cold water from the interior of the desert, and gave it to us, receiving bread for it. They also brought ropes of roots, whose smell was delicious beyond all odors. They had no permission to do this, because a prohibition on commerce was laid upon them, and they were celebrating a festival. 9. The pilgrim discovered that one of the holy months the Arabs considered sacrosanct, during which they prohibited fighting, was drawing to a close, and he heard that the chances of being attacked by the Bedouins would increase. Arabian society consisted of tribes, or large families. Each brother and each cousin could move out of the patriarchal residence and found a new clan, putting together a coalition in the extended family to vie for power or to raid the flocks of others. Some of these relationships were fictive. Occasionally, other clans joined a successful tribe, the way modern people join a political party, and by way of justification announced that they had discovered a common long-lost ancestor. Tribes engaged in a form of kinship politics and were not necessarily mobile. Most of those in the Hejaz, the northern stretch of the Tihama coastal region along the Red Sea, dwelled in towns and villages in the late 6th century, but a minority of pastoralists wandered with flocks to find patches of glaucous pasture. The two coexisted in an uneasy symbiosis. Settled people provided agricultural goods and essential grain, and the nomads traded meat and dairy products for them. 10. The trade route from Mecca to Roman Arabia appears to have revived in the last third of the 6th century. In part, this development reflected the unusual prosperity of Transjordan in this era. In part, it also derived from the Iranian invasion of Yemen in the early 570s when they dethroned the previous Ethiopian Christian dynasty in alliance with local pagans and Jews. The Sasanians thus controlled the mouth of the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandab, which opened Roman maritime commerce with Africa and Asia to interference and piracy, thus increasing the profitability of overland commerce. The Roman and Sasanian empires had for centuries engaged in a globe-straddling contest for dominance, and throughout Muhammad's lifetime this imperial struggle would intensify in its savagery, powerfully shaping his world and his views on the desirability of peace. 11. Roman historian Menander the Guardsman observed of the Arabs of this era, there are myriad Saracen tribes, for the most part anarchic desert dwellers, some of whom are loyal to the Roman state, others to the Persian. Although a few Arab clans in the region had embraced Christianity, most Arabs of the Hejaz had remained pagans, stubbornly resisting the official religion of Constantine and his successors. This conservatism may have been in part a bid for neutrality between the Christian Roman Empire and the Zoroastrian Iranian Empire, as with Mecca. Being non-committal allowed them to move freely between the two. For others, their religious traditionalism reassured Iran about Arab allies since the conversion to Christianity might signal that they tilted politically toward Constantinople. 12. During the blistering day when the sand scorched the feet, travelers huddled miserably in sheepskin tents, awaiting the gloaming to start the journey afresh. They typically accomplished some of the trip at night. The nocturnal journey challenged the camel drivers and the steeds, bouncing their passengers unevenly as their mounts stumbled blindly across jagged lava fields and rock-strewn dry riverbeds. 13. Such excursions depended on detailed Quraysh knowledge of the rugged countryside, of where the wells and oases lay and where robber bands might lie in wait. Occasionally, local tribes would have confronted Muhammad and the Quraysh, demanding that they pay out some of the goods for passage through that land. The Meccans are said to have bought off such hostile Bedouins by offering carriage to them for their leather and other goods and a share of the profits on their return. Muhammad, a scion of the Banu Hashim, which specialized in settling feuds and keeping the peace around the Kaaba sanctuary, would have found himself forced to negotiate such challenges despite his youth and inexperience. If he failed, he could face raids and lose the whole value of his trading mission, ending his career as a long-distance merchant. If he did not bring back summer wheat from Syria, some of his friends might miss some meals. Muhammad and his camel train would have proceeded through the desert flatland between the jet carapace of hilly country to the east and the turquoise sea to the west. To fill the boredom, traders recited heroic poetry of their ancestors' battle days, glorying in raids, carnage, and swordplay, matching the rhythm of the verse to the gait of the steeds. When I arise with my blade in vengeance, it slices at once, it's no dull orchard hatchet, an ancient bard boasted, characterizing his saber as being as vicious as a darting snake's head. Muhammad, being of Banu Hashim and a peace builder, likely did not approve of the glorification of rough plunderers who preyed on innocents. Wealthy pagan temples in late antiquity before the hegemony of Christianity had often been a resort for the poor. 14. The Kaaba probably played a similar charitable role. At least later in life, Muhammad recited verses condemning the one who drives away the orphan and does not advocate for feeding the poor. 15. Freebooting warriors and the lay priests of the Kaaba devoted themselves to very different values, but Arabic poetry decidedly fated the raiders. Muhammad's forebears had negotiated a set of alliances and informal treaties with most tribes of the Hejaz and Transjordan, which allowed a modest cavalcade to wend its way through the territory and involved payoffs, sharing of trading profits, marriage alliances, and respect for the Kaaba sanctuary of God and for the Quraysh as its guardians. The Quran 106:1-4 later referred to this network of treaty obligations, seeing it as a divine bestowal. Because of his benevolence toward the Quraysh, they were enabled to undertake the winter and summer caravans. So let them worship the Lord of this shrine, who provided them with food to stop their hunger and gave them security against fear. 16. Muhammad's great-grandfather Hashim ibn Abd Manaf was said to have personally visited Roman authorities in Syria, likely in the early 490s, and negotiated tariff abatements and safe passage for the Meccan merchants who journeyed through the empire. He initiated the practice of bringing bags of wheat from Damascus. Meccans timed these annual treks north just after the summer grain harvest, since they, wedged among obsidian lava beds and misshapen spatter cones, lacked that key dietary nutrient. Hejazis like Muhammad, who could not stand the cold of the Levant in December, instead went south to Yemen for winter wheat. Mecca, as a neutral city-state, could bring Indian Ocean goods up from the port of Aden and then take them to the Roman Near East. Because by treaty Iran limited the cities that could trade with Rome and charged its enemies in Constantinople a 25% tariff on desirable Asian luxury goods, Hejazis could offer these commodities at a discount by acting as a third party. 17. The Quraysh brought back staples like grain as well as raisins, wine, and Damascene swords. The substantial expenses of overland caravan trade required carrying lightweight luxury items to make the voyage worthwhile. The Hejazis were known for the precious metals and called the mines near Medina the cradle of gold. The Roman Empire had to pay large sums of gold annually to Iran to keep the peace after losing several key campaigns, an obligation that may have increased the profitability of the nuggets provided by the caravan trade. They probably also traded in leather, high-quality dates, ivory from Ethiopia, and Asian goods such as silk via Yemen. Occasionally, they may have brought wealthy Jews from Yemen up to Palestine, transporting the deceased loved ones in an ossuary for burial in the Holy Land. 18. Muhammad's Meccan caravan would have arrived at Madain Saleh, an old Nabatean oasis city also called Djdjejj. Arab tribes had invaded the Transjordan in the 300s BC, founding a kingdom there, Nabatea, where they introduced the worship of North Arabian gods. This Arab kingdom fell to Rome in 106 CE. The inhabitants continued to revere their own deities for centuries thereafter, though often in dialogue with Greek religion. The Quran called the Nabateans the greatest of the Arab states of the ancient world, after a prominent ancient tribe of southern Transjordan. 19. Bored Roman troops stationed at a base in Madain Saleh before trade routes shifted had left Latin graffiti. By 592 sand drifted listlessly through its abandoned tall red sandstone buildings bearing enigmatic runes. The Nabateans had constructed a major graveyard there for aristocrats, which they believed the gods guarded. Tomb raiders are warned in an inscription that they will have to pay a fine to Djdjejj and Hubal, and to Manotu. Djdjejj was the title of the chief of the gods among the Nabateans, who appears to have been especially important in this city. Hubal is a seldom mentioned and apparently minor deity. Manotu is the Aramaic form of Manat, the Arab goddess of fate also beloved in Medina. Some Roman troops liked her so much that they took her back to Europe. At nearby Tama, one inscription called her the goddess of goddesses. Another makes it clear that locals saw the graveyard at Madain Saleh as a sanctuary, a place of peace. The tomb and this inscription, WKTBH, are inviolable according to the nature of inviolability among the Nabateans, forever and ever. 20. The idea that a piece of writing could itself be a sanctuary of peace may have come down to the Arabs of Muhammad's own time and affected the way they perceived scriptures, whether the Bible or the Quran. Some Arabs at Madain Saleh in the 6th century likely still worshipped Manat, who capriciously set people's fate. The northern Hejaz came to be dominated in the Roman period by the Thamud tribal federation, whom the Quran, the Heights 7:74 castigated for the stubborn paganism and their rejection of a native Arab prophet, Saleh, whom God sent to them. It laments of the traditionalists in Madain Saleh, the people of Djdjejj rejected the messengers. 21. Muhammad and the rest of the column would have set off again, passing between friable sandstone hills to enter the prosperous Roman province of Third Palestine. Constantinople still administered this area and provided military security to this province from tribal raiding along the border known as the Arabian Line. For much of the 6th century, it had been aided in this task by Arab allies, the Jaffnid paramount chiefs who commanded Roman trained horsemen, as well as levies from the Ghassan, Kalb, and other tribes. Pastoral nomads proved useful to empires because their way of life made them a natural cavalry, and Roman generals in Europe deployed German tribes in the same way. In the Near East, drilled Arab cavalrymen had served as auxiliaries to the formal legions, fighting rural Arab pastoralists in return for gold from Constantinople. By 592, however, the alliance of the Romans with the Japhnids lay in tatters, placing Muhammad and his men at risk. 22. The Japhnid elite had adopted Christianity, but the Arabs who fought for this dynasty included many devotees of the old gods. The Ghassan tribe, the backbone of the Japhnid-led force, claimed a common ancestry with the tribes of Medina, the city of Muhammad's paternal great-grandmother. 23. A branch of the Jaffna lived in or around Medina, and likely some adventurous young men from Mecca and Medina had gone north as soldiers of fortune, serving the empire. Muhammad and his band would have descended the escarpment, entering a field of dunes, the shadows in their slack-like hyena stripes. When Muhammad and his band made camp long after midnight, they would have squatted around a campfire, its amber flames crackling in the stillness, cooking some supper. The Quran, the event 56, 71-73, later reminded its hearers among the Meccan caravanners, "Have you seen the fire that you made? Did you create the firewood or did we? We rendered it a reminder and a means of provisioning those strong enough to traverse the desert." They would have unpacked the beasts of burden and piled up the goods in a circle as protection from a raid and then slept with the swords close at hand. The snarling of jackals and wild Saluki hounds around the camp might have startled Muhammad awake occasionally. Muhammad and his cavalcade would have made their way into Wadi Ram in southern Transjordan. The people of this region, the Banu Judam, who succeeded the ancient Ad tribe here, were largely Christian by this time. The archaeological record and literary sources make clear, however, the continuity of the pagan population, especially on desert fringes where evidence of worship of standing stones is still found from the 500s and 600s. During an Arab revolt of the early 580s, according to a Christian contemporary of Muhammad, a group of pagan Arabs had kidnapped a young Christian man in the region just east of the Dead Sea. They were Ioannes Moschos, ca. 550-619, wrote, determined to take him to the priest and sacrifice him to the deity. Her father Nicolaus, however, prayed against them, and Moschos alleged that a demon entered him and they tore one another apart. The liberated young man then took vows and became a monk. Nor did worship of the old gods continue in the Roman Empire only on its desert fringes. As late as 579, an inquisition launched by Tiberius II found that remnants of the pagan aristocracy in Heliopolis, Baalbek, routinely persecuted lower-class Christians and that Edessa notables held ceremonies for Zeus in their private homes. 24. The remaining Arab traditionalists of Transjordan adored above all the great goddess Alat, who, inscriptions said, is in Iram, forever, referring to the ancient name for this region, which also occurs in the Quran. They believed her to inhabit the featureless square godstones, or betyls they set up. During the subsequent long centuries of Roman rule in this area, she came to be identified with the warrior goddess Athena, associated with combat protection and, ironically, peace. People in Palmyra as well had erected a temple to her wherein stood a statue of Athena and a sculpture of a gazelle sheltering between the legs of a lion with a 1st century inscription, "Alat will bless whoever will not shed blood in the sanctuary." The tribes called on her to protect them from terrifying flash floods that could abruptly sweep down the flume of a desert wadi with fatal force, even if a cloudburst had opened up a fair distance away. In Roman times, an Arab named Ak ibn D celebrated one spring when his camels gave birth to foals and provided abundant milk, scratching into the stone, so Alat, give peace. For Arabs, peace implied not only absence of deadly conflict but also safety and well-being. It clearly concerned individuals and not just the whole tribal collective. The surviving pagans likely regarded the shrines of Alat in Transjordan as tranquil sanctuaries, a belief that would have protected Muhammad and the other Meccans from raids. 25. In the 570s, the Piacenza pilgrim visited Mount Horeb in the Sinai and wrote, "At one place upon the mountain, the Saracens have placed a marble idol of their own, as white as snow. There also dwells a priest of theirs, dressed in a dalmatic and pallium of linen. When the time of the festival arrives, as soon as the moon is up before its rays have departed from the festival, that marble begins to change color. As soon as the moon's rays have entered in, when they begin to worship the idol, the marble becomes black as pitch. When the time of the feast is over, it returns to its original color, a great object of wonder to us all. 26. The Arabs held that the deities inhabited these square, featureless betyls. Pagan Arabs believed that any major shrine to a deity created a safe zone around itself, prohibiting violence such as tribal feuds. Muhammad and his men were devoted to such a shrine in Mecca. In addition, they put aside 4 months of the year as sacred, during which they forbade raiding and fighting by the tribes. A Roman ambassador to the Arabs, Nonassos, observed a few decades before Muhammad's birth that they have a sacred meeting place consecrated to one of the gods where they assemble twice a year. One of these meetings lasts a whole month. The other lasts 2 months. He added, during these meetings complete peace prevails, not only amongst themselves, but also with all the natives, even the animals are at peace both with themselves and human beings. 27. The ambassador confused 2 distinct sorts of sanctuary, the peaceful district around a temple and the sacred nature reserve where hunting was prohibited. The precincts around the betyl stone of Alat in the Hehazi city of Taif served as a nature reserve. Mecca was both a sacred space of peace and an area where animals could not be harmed. Muhammad and his men, however, had left behind their realm of safety and entered the sometimes raucous tribal domains of the Eastern Roman Empire. Perhaps Christian converts living in Wadi Ram blamed the decline of Nabatea and its fall to Rome on their predecessors' paganism and told young Muhammad and the Meccans of how the God of Abraham and Moses had punished the ancients. Certainly, that is the lesson the Quran drew, remarking of God, He is the Lord of Sirius, who brought the ancient people of Ad to ruin. 28. Then the band might have stopped at Petra, one of the wonders of the world that must have astonished Muhammad every time he saw it, with its magnificent pink abandoned temples and monumental edifices carved right into the towering sandstone. A 19th-century Western traveler described one of the breathtaking buildings in this city. This monument is sculptured out of an enormous and compact block of freestone, slightly tinged with oxide of iron. What a people must they not have been who thus opened the mountain to stamp upon it the seal of their energy and genius. He spoke of the magical effect produced on the eye by the harmonious tints of the stone, from which the edifice was composed, standing out as it does in a limpid rosy hue detached from the rough and somber color of the mountain. 29. The Quran Dawn 89, 6-8 later commented, Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with with Iram and its columns, the like of which had never been created in any land? Petra had been, 500 years before, the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. After pagan Rome conquered them, the locals had gradually identified their northern Arabian deities with Olympian figures like Zeus, Aphrodite, and Athena, and surely in doing so they influenced Mecca to the south as well. Despite the rapid progress of Christianity after 312 CE, some people in Petra had still sung hymns to the warrior goddess Alat in Arabic in the early 5th century, and some furtive such votaries likely remained in its precincts a century and a half later, when Muhammad may have visited it. Locals had also worshipped Manat, the goddess of fate, assimilating her to the Greek goddess Tyche and depicting her as holding a wheel of fortune. 30. Nabateans of the Roman period carved a Greek inscription into the Qasr Bint in Petra that has been read as dedicated to Zeus Hypsistos, God the Most High. Some worshippers of Zeus and his local manifestations, influenced by Judaism and Christianity, had moved toward a pagan monotheism, centered on the one unnamed god Theos, the All-High. Those All-Highers who kept their own rites but associated with Jews and Christians as fellow monotheists gained the epithet God-fearers. Although most people in the Hejaz still worshipped an Arab pantheon, some of them likely adhered to a cult of a supreme deity, a reform of Greco-Roman paganism in dialogue with North Arabian ideas and the Bible. 31. Muhammad, from parched Mecca, might have found Petra's pools and gardens, fed by an intricate set of canals and aqueducts, to be its most striking feature. In 592 the city served as the administrative center for the Roman province of Third Palestine. A Greek papyrus trove reveals 6th century Petra to have been a rich agricultural center producing wheat, fruits from orchards, and wine. Roman Near Easterners still enjoyed great prosperity and could have barely imagined the economic tailspin into which the Huns and Germanic tribal invaders had plunged Western Europe. For citizens in the East, the Roman Empire still had not fallen. 32. The papyri also reveal Greek to have been the urban standard language, used by the city's Arabic speakers for formal purposes. Near Easterners in the 6th and 7th centuries had multiple identities and often spoke several languages, using each in a sophisticated way. They were not divided, as 19th century Orientalism would have had it, into Semites and Greeks. A long-distance merchant like Muhammad operated in a trilingual environment of Arabic, Greek, and Aramaic. Multilingual people switch back and forth between languages and adopt loanwords or use ideas from one language to imbue existing words in another with new meanings. Though he had come a long way from home, Muhammad was still often among Arabs. He would have found unusual words in their Neoplatonic and Christian Greek-inflected Arabic for conceptions such as divine love, wisdom, and salvation, which would have piqued his curiosity. 33. Perhaps Muhammad and his caravan stopped off to trade in Jerusalem. They would not have been the only ones from the Red Sea littoral. The Piacenza pilgrim, visiting in 570, said he saw men there from the direction of Ethiopia, with slit ears and noses and wearing rings on both fingers and toes. After Emperor Constantine's conversion in 312, the rulers of Christian Rome had gradually rebuilt the city as a New Jerusalem, raising colossal temples to Aphrodite and Zeus and maintaining, at least de jure, a long-standing ban on Jews. Constantine's officials made the Church of the Holy Sepulchre the city's spiritual center. Preachers and believing traders in the market would have told Muhammad and his party stories about Jesus Christ, who taught turning the other cheek and would one day return to bring a 1,000-year reign of peace. It is said that even the pagan Meccans kept icons of Jesus and Mary in the Kaaba. 34. After the Roman destruction of the Second Jewish Temple in 70 CE, the Temple Mount lay abandoned, an empty esplanade that may have still sported a crumbling statue of Zeus placed there by the old traditionalist Romans. Jewish tradition identified it with Mount Moriah, where God was held to have commanded the patriarch Abraham to sacrifice his son. The biblical story of Abraham had implied that he fathered pastoral nomads such as the Arabs through his son with Hagar, Ishmael. Genesis 16:12 says, "He shall be a wild ass of a man, with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him." The account in Genesis could, however, also be read to give the Arabs a high religious status as progeny of the patriarch. God appeared to Hagar and ordered her to return to the service of her mistress, Sarah, and he promised her he would so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude. Gen. 16:9-10. Jewish historian Flavius Josephus d. ca. 100 CE wrote that Ishmael had 12 sons, whose descendants inhabited all the country from the Euphrates to the Red Sea and called it Nabatean. They're an Arabian nation. At least later in his life, Muhammad took this genealogy for the Meccans seriously, seeing the Kaaba as having been founded by Abraham and Ishmael after, he believed, they emigrated south to the Hejaz from Canaan. He viewed the Temple Mount as a place of cosmic spirituality linked mystically to Mecca. 35. Leaving Jerusalem, Muhammad and the Quraysh would have turned northeast and passed through Philadelphia on their way to Bostra on the Hauran Plateau. Bostra served as the capital of Roman Arabia, where a duke commanded Roman military units in the area. Muhammad knew from his scouts that security in this region had declined and that his band had to beware Bedouin raiders. Having come so far, and spent so much money on this journey, he would face disaster, and perhaps a fatal tarnishing of his promising mercantile career if tribesmen carried off his goods before he could reach his destination. The arrangement whereby Constantinople in the 6th century depended on an allied Arab cavalry to supplement troops at the frontier had fallen apart, threatening the security of Muhammad's caravan. In better days, in 580, Tiberios II had brought the Jafnate Falach al-Mundir III to his resplendent court in Constantinople in great pomp and allowed him to wear his own crown, a symbolic triumph for the Arabs that certainly reverberated in Mecca and Medina as well. 36. Al-Mundir, not actually a king, had no realm. Rather, his troops and tribesmen enjoyed a special position in eastern Syria and Transjordan, where they served under the urban-based dukes of the Roman military units. Tiberios fell out with Al-Mundir soon after he had bestowed on him the title of Lesser King, suspecting him of colluding with the enemy during an abortive Roman-Arab expedition of 581 against the army of the Iranian Emperor Hormizd IV r. 579-590.37. Tiberios brought Al-Mundir ignominiously to Constantinople that winter and put him and his family under house arrest. John of Ephesus wrote that Al-Mundir's eldest son, man, angered, gathered his forces and attacked a major Roman fort in Syria, and, accepting the people whom they either took captive or slew, and what they burnt, everything else they plundered and carried away, gold and silver, and brass and iron, until the whole country of the east to the shores of the Mediterranean was in terror at him, and fled for refuge to the cities. Then man's tribal levies had surrounded Bostra's strong walls, demanding that the city's troops surrender Al-Mundir's armor and other property deposited there for safekeeping. John of Ephesus observed, and when the commandant, who was a man of note and fame, heard these things, he was very angry, and gathered his troops together, and sallied out, despising them as roving Arabs, and they set themselves in array against him, and overpowered and slew both him and large numbers of his men. The Arab horsemen fought the Roman army using the imperial tactics in which they had long been trained, with devastating results. The citizens of Bostra then turned over Al-Mundir's property with alacrity. 38. A medieval chronicler, Michael the Syrian of Antioch, maintained that in the aftermath, the realm of the Jafnate Arabs was divided among 15 princes. Most of them joined in with the Iranians, and thereafter the realm of the Christian Arabs came to an end and ceased, as a result of the perfidy of the Romans. 39. Some of the Arab chieftains, however, clearly continued to be loyal to Constantinople. A decade after that revolt, Muhammad may have held parleys with emissaries of the local Arab Falach of that day, seeking safe passage. Medieval biographer Ibn S.A.D told a story that as they approached the city of Bostra, the party halted for a break. Muhammad sat a day beneath a tree. A local monk named Nestorios approached Kadia's agent Maysara breathlessly with a series of questions about the stranger. He declared, no one but a prophet has ever sat a day beneath that tree. 40. The anecdote is, of course, a later Muslim apologetic. But stories that Meccan merchants such as Muhammad stayed in monasteries that doubled as inns and conducted amicable discussions with the monks are entirely plausible. Years later, Muhammad as an old man would recite verses of the Quran that praised Christians for their loving attitude, adding, that is because they have among them priests and monks, and they are not haughty. 41. Muhammad and his companions entered Bostra's great gates and passed under the Roman triumphal arch, proceeding along a colonnaded boulevard lined with two-story shops, in view of the spires of the domed Grand Cathedral. The caravanners would have found that Bostra, long an episcopal see, had a Christian majority, though some surrounding villages appear to have been pagan well into the 6th century. The traders stayed in the Christian cloisters that often served as caravanserais and would have marveled at the fine mosaics and marble revetments. Some monasteries had been founded by the Arab Phylix and may have been peopled by Arab Christian monks. These complexes were laid out as a quadrangle, with a church, a dormitory, hostels, a refectory for meals, and other buildings, linked by porticos. In Bostra, monasteries dominated the center of the city. Despite his respect for its proponents, Muhammad found the Near Eastern Christian tradition too monastic and ascetic. The saints of this church, stylites, would sometimes erect a platform atop a pillar in the desert and climb up on it, living most of the time there. 42. The Quran Ayah 57:27 remonstrated that, as for monasticism, they invented it, we did not prescribe it to them. Despite Emperor Mauritius's vehement championing of Christianity, it did not enjoy a monopoly on religious discourse or on monotheism. Some local Platonists and other highly cultured Syrians were devoted to what they saw as a single first principle, which could hardly be multiple. 43. Only a few decades before Muhammad's journey for Khadija, the great Neoplatonic thinker from Damascus, Damaskios d. ca. 550, had stayed with pagan friends in Bostra after fleeing Christian persecution in Alexandria. He wrote that his teacher Isidoros had moved away from the worship of statues of the gods which had been prohibited, and instead was quickly moving toward the gods themselves, who are concealed not in temples but in the mystery of the ineffable, through the power of love, and held that the gods were really only 1.44. Muhammad, as a young man from a non-Christian background with a thirst for spirituality, would have eagerly discussed religious ideas with Gentile monotheists as well as with friars. The Meccans would have bathed at the public baths and taken their wares to the great month-long fair, trading their handful of gold nuggets and small quantities of ivory, silk, jewelry, and decorated leather for grain, wine, armor, and worked metal tools and weapons. Muhammad is said to have doubled Qadia's investment. The conditions of commerce were dictated not only by local dynamics, as with the rebellion of the Jaffnids, but also by geopolitics. The outbreak of peace between Constantinople and the Iranian capital of Ctesiphon that prevailed in the 590s somewhat offset the dangers for Muhammad's mission created by the decline of the Arab Federate system. Ironically, a coup in Iran's White Palace helped along this era of good feeling. The brothers-in-law of Hormizd IV assassinated him in 590 and then tried to ensconce his 20-year-old son, their nephew, as Shah. Their attempt to become regents of the young Khosrow II, and so the power behind the throne, backfired when another pretender, the senior general Bahram Koban, emerged and took power. Khosrow II, the heir apparent, fled to Constantinople, applying desperately to Emperor Marikios R. 582-602, for help in recovering his birthright. The Roman Augustus accepted these entreaties in return for territory that had been usurped by Iran. Marikios gave his guest help in returning to power, and harmonious relations ensued in the 590s.45. A Persian romance from that era gives a sense of how the Zoroastrian court in Ctesiphon probably celebrated the restoration. On such a festive occasion, the emperor ordained that red rubies, royal pearls, and jewels be bestowed on the chief priest. Then the monarch fell prostrate on his face, and offered much thanksgiving to Ormazed God, to the immortal Holy Spirits, to the victory halo of the first kings, and to the triumphant, regal sacred fire. 46. Muhammad and the Quraysh likely stayed in Bostra for a month, making the trades and enjoying city life. On such journeys, some reports suggest that they routinely went north to Damascus, for further commerce, before undertaking the nearly month-long return journey to Mecca. Merchants in the Hejaz often traveled during the 4 sacred months when tribes abstained from raiding and made a circuit to sanctuary cities with trade fairs that forbade fighting. Still, occasionally contentious tribes, jealous of their honor, broke these rules. A story is told that one day at a seasonal market in the central Arabian city of Ukaz, some visiting young men of the Kinana and Quraysh tribes were in a mood for love. They happened upon a lithe, beautiful young woman from the Ama clan of the Hawazin tribe, sitting in the Ukaz market. She was talking to some Bedouin boys. She had on a single long dress, wearing nothing beneath it. The young men from Mecca crowded around her and tried to flirt with her, but she would not give them a glimpse of her face. One of them surreptitiously knelt behind her and managed to get a thorn into the hem of her robe and to attach it to her waist without her noticing. When she stood up, her backside was visible to all and sundry. The young bucks guffawed and said, "You didn't let us see your front, but you granted us a view of your rear." Mortified, she cried out, "O people of Ama." Her tribesmen jumped to the feet and drew the swords, but the Banu Kinana stood the ground. A sanguinary battle ensued. In order to make peace, the notable Harb ibn Umayyah of the powerful Abd Shams clan of Quraysh intervened and paid the blood money for those who had been killed in the fracas, as well as remitting a fine to Banu Ama for the besmirching of the honor of the female relative. Several such melees had broken out during Muhammad's youth in the 580s, known as the sacrilegious wars because the Kinana fought him even in the sacred months. In this instance, Harb was willing to spend some money to quiet things down because he did not want a dispute in Ukaz to come home to Mecca and spoil both its sacred tranquility and its commerce. In vendetta societies, payment of blood money is a key way of avoiding a feud and ongoing violence. 47. As head of the Hashim clan, Muhammad's uncle Abu Talib maintained tranquility around the sanctuary. Once, when this paramount chief suspected a member of Hashim of committing a murder, it is said that Abu Talib came to the defendant and confronted him. "You have 3 choices, either you can pay 100 camels for killing one of our people, or 50 of your kin can swear that you did not kill him, or if you refuse we'll execute you for his sake." 48. The Quran makes it clear that Muhammad also disapproved of feuding and undertook the vocation of peacemaking. The family of Amram 3:103 says of God, "You were enemies, but he united your hearts, so that by his blessing you became siblings. You were on the brink of a pit of fire, and he delivered you from it." Back in Mecca, Muhammad's rising reputation as a canny merchant and manager of men impressed Khadija on a personal and not just a business level. A later biographer described her as a resolute, disciplined and honorable woman, and said, she was, in those days, the most distinguished in lineage among the Quraysh, the greatest of them in nobility, and the wealthiest of them. Every member of her clan wanted to marry her if he could, seeking her hand and lavishing her with gifts. 49. He explained that Khadija had secretly sent a female emissary, Nafisa, to Muhammad on his return with a caravan from Damascus around 592. Nafisa had asked him, "Muhammad, what holds you back from marrying?" He said, "I do not have anything at hand to give in marriage." Nafisa asked, "If you were provided the means and received an inquiry from an attractive, prosperous, and well-born woman of equal status, what would you say?" He said, "Who is this?" She said, "Khadija." He asked, "How could that be possible for me?" She said, "Leave that to me." 50. And so they married. With Khadija's backing, Muhammad led summer trading missions to cities such as Bosra, Gaza, and Damascus, perhaps annually. Indeed, it seems likely that he would have maintained a summer-fall home in Syria and should be seen as a Damascene or Bostran as much as a Meccan. A late 7th century author, Jacob of Edessa, wrote that Muhammad went down for trade to the lands of Palestine, Arabia and Syrian Phoenicia. A medieval Christian chronicler speaking of the early 7th century wrote, he used to go up from his town, Yathrib, to Palestine for commerce, buying and selling. Passages of the Quran suggest that he also regularly conducted winter commerce to the south in Yemen, with its Iranian garrisons and local pagans, Jews, and Christians. 51. Muhammad did not take another wife until Khadija's death in 620. He then married 2 women in the early 620s, first the widow Sauda bint Zam and then Aisha bint Abi Bakr. I bring this up because Aisha lived to an advanced age and became the alleged source of many narratives about Muhammad's life. 52. Aisha asserted that Muhammad became a spiritual seeker, dissatisfied with his traditional religion. She explained then he began liking solitude, and he used to go off alone to the grotto of Hira. He would perform devotions, which are a form of nocturnal worship, for many days before returning to his family. He would stock up on provisions, then later on return to Khadija, and stock up again in the same way. Meccans had a local custom of withdrawing occasionally to the wilderness, cutting themselves off from the world and engaging in prayer and rituals, seeking forgiveness for transgressions or escape from some travail. During this withdrawal they made charitable donations and freed slaves. Muhammad would spend a month of each year this way, distributing food to the poor and meditating, impatiently waiting for a sign. 53. The idea of the sanctuary looms large in Muhammad's story. The tribes honored Mecca as a shared sacred city where feuds had to be put aside and even the hunting of animals was banned. The city of peace, moreover, cast a long shadow. A common reverence for God and his tabernacle, the Kaaba, and respect for the clan that served as its custodian allowed the Quraysh to craft treaties with surrounding tribes, thus fostering the caravan trade that brought grain and other staples to Mecca. Despite the waning of the Pax Romana, Muhammad likely formed a favorable impression of the order and security it still provided. In the 3 centuries after the establishment of the Roman Empire in 27 BCE, emperors became lenient to the conquered, and the provinces of the empire experienced relative tranquility. After Constantine's Christian revolution of the 300s, visionaries such as the historian Eusebius reworked the old notion of imperial harmony, one universal power. The Roman Empire arose and flourished while the enduring and implacable hatred of nation against nation was now removed. He then Christianized the motif, and as the knowledge of one God, and one way of religion and salvation, even the doctrine of Christ, was made known to all mankind, so at the self-same period, the entire dominion of the Roman Empire being vested in a single sovereign, profound peace reigned throughout the world. 54. The empire in the late 500s hardly exemplified the ideals of Eusebius, but it offered more security than Muhammad's native Arabia, where only the law of the desert reigned in some regions. By the late 500s the dream of a Roman peace faced severe challenges. Much of Western Europe had come under the rule of warring German chieftains, and the economy of the West had collapsed. In the east the threat of incursions by Sasanian Iran and its Arab allies always loomed, despite the 561 to 562 peace treaty. Sectarian factionalism roiled the institutions of the imperial faith. Emperors Tiberios II and Mauricios favored a Christology based on the 451 Council of Chalcedon, holding that Christ is of one substance with God but that he had 2 distinct natures, human and divine, in one person. They pursued a harsh policy of intolerance toward Near Eastern Miaphysites, who saw Christ as having only one nature, which is both human and divine. The clash between these factions underlay in part the disgrace of the Miaphysite al-Mundhir III and the fall of the Arab alliance. The Quran, the Table 5:14, would later depict God as complaining, "We made a covenant with those who say, we are Christians, but they forgot a portion of what they were reminded about. We therefore cast enmity and hatred among them until the resurrection day, and God will recount to them the things they did." Even Christian apologists such as Ammianus Marcellinus, ca. 330 to 395, admitted that no wild beasts are so hostile to men as Christian sects in general are to one another. 55. Although most of his biographers have treated him as a provincial holy man, Muhammad traveled widely. He would have been acquainted with Roman law, culture, and languages. Contrary both to later Muslim apologetics and to the assumptions of Western Orientalists, he was literate, as any great long-distance merchant would have been. He knew the Bible, probably in written Aramaic versions and oral Arab traditions, though possibly in Greek as well. 56. In his 30s, I suspect Muhammad's inner thirst took him to Christian monasteries, eldritch shrines, Jewish synagogues, and Neoplatonist salons in Damascus and Bostra. Unexpectedly, his quest ended when its object came instead to him.